There we go.
There, we'll start that.
Yeah, you should probably close the door.
Right. Well, thank you for attending, everyone. My name is Eric Ching. I'm an attorney here in San Diego. I'm a partner at the Ching Settle and Zhang. Thank you for everyone attending. Today's topic is going to actually be about Assembly Bill number 5. We know it as Bill number 5, but this is actually what we know as in California law, which is the new employee and independent contractor law that will be in effect starting the new year, January 1st, 2020. Why this law is significant? Well, because it does have major implications on small businesses as well as large businesses and how they classify workers in the workplace. Right? Majority of times when you workplace, you can be classified as an employee right now, and if you're an employee, the employer has to pay certain like disability insurance for you, unemployment insurance for you, healthcare benefits, paid time off. So a lot of employers, to save on some of these overhead costs, will tend to classify certain workers as independent contractors, right? As an independent contractor, you don't need to pay an hourly wage, or you don't need to pay, for the unemployment insurance. You don't need to pay for the disability insurance. You don't need to pay for a lot of the certain benefits that the law currently requires if you're an employee under California law. So that's why the current California legislature has passed is AB 5 to basically solidify the definition of what an employee is, as well as what a independent contractor is. I do want to go through some background, how this basically started. Back in 2018, there was a California Supreme Court case, which is known as Dynamax Operation West Inc. versus Superior Court of Los Angeles. Okay? And basically, this case changed the landscape for classifying employees and employers, because previously, and I want you to know, there's two cases: the Dynamax case as well as the we call it the Borrillo case. Basically, SG Borrello and Sons Inc. versus Department of Industrial Relations. This is the 1989 case. The Borrello case set 9 factors in terms of what a employer or employee is and what an independent contractor. And if you met those 9 factors, or they weighed those 9 factors in order to determine whether or not a worker is actually an employee or an independent contractor. Now, as you can see, these 9 factors are going to be very cumbersome. There's, as you see here, right, these 9 factors, and it was really unclear whether or not these 9, how the courts looked at these 9 factors, and they weighed. So it became a very situational type of test for whether or not a worker is going to be an employee or an independent contractor. So then, start in 2018, because of the Dynamax case, the Dynamax case basically reduced these 9 factors into 3 factors. We call it the ABC test, okay? Because there's 3 factors test. In the Dynamax case, it reduced the 9 factors to these 3 factors. First factor is the worker is free from control in the direction of the hiring entity in connection with the performance of the work, both under the contract for the performance of the work and in fact. And B, that the worker performs work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. And C, that the worker is customarily engaged in an independent established trade. So these are the 3 factors that is the new test for determining whether an employee or a worker is an employee or independent contractor. Now, the key thing here, under the ABC test, workers will be presumed to be employees. So if you hire someone, if any small business hires someone, that worker is automatically presumed to be a employee, which means the small business or the business is obligated to pay for disability insurance, health benefits, paid time off or sick leave and stuff like that. Unless the only time when an employer can classify a worker as an independent contractor is if they can prove these factors. Okay? And so that's what the Dynamex case determined, and then the new statute that has been passed starting in January 1st, 2020, basically codifies the Dynamex case as the new law. Okay. So why this is important? So as we go back to the three tests. Test A tends to be fairly easy, right, to accomplish. Worker is free from the control and direction of the hiring entity. So I'll give you guys a very example. You guys all know the company Uber, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So if I'm driving for Uber, right, I make my own schedule, I have my own car, I can satisfy this test, right? The worker is free from the control and direction of the hiring entity. Uber doesn't control my schedule. Right. Uber also doesn't tell me what customers that I have to accept and stuff like that, right? So this test is fairly simple to satisfy. Now let's skip down to C. The worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature. Well, if I'm an Uber driver, right, I basically essentially act as my own boss, have my own business essentially. I'm driving, people that are referred. So test C is actually fairly easy to satisfy too for Uber to classify them as independent contractors. Test B is going to be the most difficult for Uber to satisfy. The worker performs work that is outside the usual course of a hiring entity's business. Arguably, Uber is in the business of carpooling, right? They're in the business of carpooling, right? So does that mean after this new law is implemented, all the drivers for Uber has to be classified as employees and not independent contractors anymore? Mm-hmm. That essentially is what this law is aimed to basically, you can call it hurt or provide more rights to Uber drivers, but Uber right now is arguing that, well, we are a app-based company. We are a software development company, right? Our usual business is developing this app and not necessarily driving people around, right? So this is a law that Uber, Lyft, and a lot of the gig companies out there is trying to fight, and I guarantee you starting January 1st, you will see a lot of lawsuits by Uber, by Lyft, by these gig economy, that they will try to challenge this law and saying either that Uber drivers should not be classified as full-time employees, or that they should be as independent contractors, right? Because this law basically directly affects what Uber and Lyft is trying to do. Okay. So I want to delve more into the factor B, because that's going to be a lot of headaches for a lot of. Okay. So California Supreme Court, they adopted the ABC test. It was actually based on a Massachusetts law. So there's 2 states in the country right now that has implemented the ABC test for employees versus independent contractors. The other state is Massachusetts. Now in Massachusetts, the Part B test, the employer can establish that Part B test by either proving the services that the worker is performing is outside the course of the business, or that the work is performed outside of all the places of the hiring entities. This is usually easy to satisfy. If you work remotely, right, you're not working at the business then, right? So then you can satisfy Part B by just saying, well, this worker is just like an Uber driver, right? They're not working at Uber headquarters, right? They're driving their own car around. So Part B can actually be easily satisfied, at least in Massachusetts. Problem is, California does not adopt the two-prong test for factor B. California has only implemented the first prong, which is you have to show that an Uber driver is not part of the usual business of Uber. Right? And that's extremely hard for Uber to prove. Right? But you can also see how this law will implicate smaller businesses also, right? We have a lot of small businesses out there that, you know, have project-based, right? A lot of Qualcomm employees, they are contractors for Qualcomm. They're engineers, but they're classified as contractors. Under this new law, a lot of tech companies are unable to hire a lot of workers on independent contractor basis and must classify them as a employee and pay them, you know, give them the benefits, disability benefits, unemployment insurance and stuff like that. So it says Part B is going to be a lot of hurdles for a lot of companies out there in order for them to actually meet the test and to basically properly classify them as independent contractors. Okay. So there are definitely exceptions to all this, and I do want to point out some exceptions that the law has carved out. Certain industries, because they have strong lobby groups in the California legislature, they have basically carved out exceptions. Okay, so if you're a licensed insurance agent, so if you're selling car insurance, health insurance, any type of insurance that requires a license, you can be classified as an independent contractor. So if you work for like Allstate selling insurance, or you work for New York Life selling health insurance, you can be an independent contractor, even though you don't meet those the ABC test. All right, licensed healthcare professionals. We have a very strong healthcare lobby in Sacramento, so which means that doctors that work for hospitals, they can be classified as independent contractors. Wow. Yes. All right. Registered securities brokers, dealers, investment advisors. So if you have a financial advisor, they can also be classified as an independent contractor. Direct sales, salespersons. Real estate. Real estate has always been an exception to the employee rule. When you work for a broker selling and buying real estate as a licensed agent, you are classified as an independent contractor. Your broker doesn't have to pay you a minimum wage, doesn't have to give you healthcare benefits because you're classified as an independent contractor. Commercial fishermen, workers providing licensed barber or cosmetology services. So if you go to a nail salon or a hair salon place, a lot of the workers there are independent contractors. Okay. And others performing work under a contract for professional services. Why they did add this in? Inclusive, because attorneys, if I retain someone as my attorney, right, they're not exactly working for me as a employee, they're working for me as my attorney, and they're called a contractor. So that they carved out that exception there. Right. The unclarity is whether a law firm can actually hire contract attorneys. Right. The law is a little unclear on that. So is this law only specifically referring to if I'm just a normal person and hire an attorney, or does that law also apply to a law firm that is hiring an attorney as a contractor? So, okay. So this is an important thing because right now we have a lot of issues with immigration and determining who can be an employee, right? You go to certain someone will tell you, hey, you're not documented here in the United States, you can't be classified, you don't have employee rights. The law states aliens and minors, okay, regardless of your immigration status, you are an employee. If you're hired by a company, all right, and the company tells you, hey, you cannot, we're not gonna pay you a minimum wage because you're undocumented, you still have employee rights, and you can assert them in California. This includes elected and appointed paid public officers, so you're elected, that's also your employee. Members of the boards, board of directors, house maintenance and caregiver, this is a big one. We're so close to Mexico right now, you know, people come over the border, say we'll clean your house, right? If they can also technically become employees of you if you hire them. Prisoner workers, right now, our prison system, we tend to like to use them to do certain jobs that no one wants to do. Well, they have rights now, employee rights. Working members of partnership or liability companies, persons who holds powers to a revocable trust, person assigned work and vocational rehabilitation programs. So it lists out a lot of, but the big ones here are the undocumented workers, because legislation, California government wants to give undocumented workers employer rights, regardless of their immigration status. So that's essentially what AB 5 does for California. Okay. So essentially, starting January 1st, all right, a lot of the labor, the employees, the workers here in California will have a lot more rights. And if you're ever hired by someone and they tell you, well, we're just gonna give you a 1099, which is the tax provision for independent contractors, you can say, look, California law requires, if I'm doing work and unless you can prove to me that you satisfy A, B, and C, you need to classify me as an employee and pay me minimum wage, because once you're an employee, you're entitled to a minimum wage. By, I believe, 2023, don't quote me on that, minimum wage is $15 an hour. So imagine if you're driving for Uber as an employee, the time that I'm just sitting in my car on call, Uber still has to pay me my minimum wage. Right? So there's a lot of implications to that. Whether it's gonna hurt or help our economy, it's up in the air. I cannot say, but you can imagine if I'm hiring someone and I have to classify them as an employee and I have to pay them minimum wage, I have to pay them, give them all these benefits and all that California law requires. If I'm a small business owner, do you think I'm gonna stay in California, or do you think I'm going to leave California to move to a state that has more favorable laws for small business owners, right?
Yeah, you probably move.
Yeah, you probably move, right? Bigger companies like Uber, right? I'm sure everyone here has used Uber before, right? The Uber drivers is ecstatic for this, right? They love this law saying, well, it looks like Uber now needs to pay me a minimum wage, right? They need to give me benefits and, you know, meal breaks, break time and stuff like that. Well, if I'm Uber, I'm looking at this law, maybe I'm talking to say, well, I'm just not gonna operate in California anymore, right? I'm just gonna only operate in states that allows me to classify my drivers as an independent contractor and pay them only for the services that they perform rather than for the time that they are on call for driving people around. So there's a lot of implications regarding this law. It's difficult to say how the courts are going to interpret this law and how they're going to, you know, either, because I'm sure January 1st, Uber, Lyft, all these gig companies are going to file lawsuits basically challenging this law or saying that they are exempt from having to adhere to this law. Okay, but as of now, this law is coming up January 1st. We'll see what happens with California's economy, how businesses are going to deal with this law. So far, talking to a lot of clients, they are, you know, restructuring their hiring practices. They are looking more to, you know, they want to hire people, but they also are afraid of the overhead that is going to cause when they have to classify these people as employees rather than independent contractors. Questions?
Okay, I guess my one question would be,
Sure.
Like, I know that this is California law, but is there like a similar law at the federal level? Or?
Oh, very good. Very excellent question. So this is California law. Like I said, we're the second state in the nation to adopt the ABC test.
Yeah.
Federal law, for tax purposes, there's no labor code for federal law. all the labor codes are state, right? But the tax code does have their own definition of what an employee is and what an independent contractor is. For tax purposes, there might be a difference, but for practical reasons, if you're already going to be paying someone's unemployment, disability, stuff like that, you might as well start paying their payroll taxes also, and stuff like that, because because, and also you have to consider you're filing state taxes too. But that's a good question, how CPAs are gonna deal with, the difference in federal law. Let's say I'm classifying this worker as a contractor or an employee for only purposes of federal law, but for California, my tax returns are going to label them as, employees. Yeah, it's very unclear, because there is a clear difference between federal law and California law right now, so it's
So
different.
you're saying that if there's a difference in the federal definition of employee versus independent contractor versus California's definition, then the employer may not be paying payroll taxes for federal purposes, but they may have to contribute to unemployment insurance?
Possibly, I'm uncertain how this is going to be seen, and the conflict. We're gonna have to possibly look at how Massachusetts does it, cause if Massachusetts does the ABC test, right, then they've also have a difference in what the federal law test is.
Has there been any talk of this creating a watershed effect on other states following suit and, following California, because of the Uber and Lyft and all those ride-sharing apps?
Absolutely. California tends to be the state that always is first in doing something. We pass things, and then other states like to see how it's implemented, how the market reacts, and then if they see a positive reaction, then a lot of other states will also pass these type of laws too.
One other thing I noticed in this new law, or I didn't see any it being addressed, is there's no guidance on the length of time the employee is performing a service. Like, as you mentioned earlier, with like Qualcomm hiring engineers to work on specific projects, so there's no carve out for those. When
No.
you're hiring someone to do work for a very short period of time,
Right.
they can still be an employee.
Correct. The key thing in this law is it's not based on length. It's not like, you're a part-time, you're only working 20 hours, so you can be an independent contractor. Even if you only work an hour a day for someone, if the employer cannot meet the ABC test, you are still an employee and subject to taxes and benefits, okay? There is the test isn't based on, I only work a certain amount of time, so I should be an independent contractor. Right? So there's no length of time that's required. Yes.
Is there an example? Well, in this, it says that if the court rules that the new ABC test cannot be applied, then you would apply the old test to make the determination.
Right.
What is an example of when an ABC test cannot be applied?
Well, that's a good question. At the top of my head, I don't know. If for some reason the court finds that, if the ABC test isn't, for example, if Uber challenges this law, and they, for some reason, are able to carve out an exception to this ABC test, then based on what is written in the statutes, it sounds like then the 9-factor test will be the one that determines whether or not it's a worker or an independent contractor.
So they provided that under AB 5 just as a fallback?
As a fallback, correct.
Gotcha. In case there's any arguments over the interpretation of it. Okay.
Questions? Nothing?
To kind of piggyback up on what was said earlier, if the independent contractors are not gonna be considered employees, there's gonna be a different standard as to how they get, onboarded to this company. So like Uber, anyone can pick up an app and then boom, they're off to the races by, taking people around. So I feel like this would create a different, process as to how people now sign up to become Uber drivers, for example.
Oh, absolutely.
There's gonna be a different level of, I guess, scrutiny as to, like a regular employee would go through.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, now if Uber knows that they have to be paying a minimum wage, for the time that they're working for Uber, they're gonna have more control over their employees, right? They're gonna say you have to pick these people up, you can't reject, requests or something like that. They're gonna have shifts and you're gonna be designated shifts. So there are definitely gonna be a lot of implications. I'm unsure of what Uber is going to do. Like I said, I know they're filing lawsuits to challenge this law, but in the meantime, how are they going to implement systems to adhere to this and to also make sure whoever they hire is going to follow, their rules and regulations in being an Uber driver. So definitely it will have an impact on their current business structure.
And a lot of people do it as like a part-time
Yeah.
kind of, job, or part-time income making, deal. So I just, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, when the law kicks into effect in January, and how people are gonna be flexible enough to be able to, I think you mentioned something about the hours. You said there's not a limit as to how many hours they are required to be on the clock.
Yeah, there's no, as I said, you're automatically presumed to be an employee unless you can prove all three factors.
Right.
And those are the ABC tests. And like I said, B is the most challenging for all companies out there right now, because a lot of them do hire contractors that perform essentially the work that the business does. And how they're gonna overcome that, I have no idea.
And also, can you please mention what you said earlier about what's the exception to real estate agents? You said real estate agents have a different standard.
Yes,
and-
so
and
certain
why is that?
certain industries in California, because they have such a strong lobby group in
Okay.
Sacramento, they always carve out. So healthcare professionals, like doctors, they can be independent contractors when they work for a hospital, because a lot of doctors, they work for multiple hospitals, right? For real estate agents also, because we have a strong real estate lobby, they also, if you work for a brokerage, let's say I buy and sell and I hang my license with a broker, the broker doesn't have to pay me a minimum wage, they don't have to pay me, health insurance or disability insurance or unemployment insurance, right? I sell a house, they give me my commission, and they give me a 1099 at the end of the year. So that's an exception. Even though buying and selling property is part of the business, they can still classify all their agents as independent contractors and not have to adhere to the employee side of regulations and provide certain benefits for them.
And that's strictly because of the lobbying efforts, I
That's
guess.
strictly beyond. Uber tried to lobby to carve out exceptions to this law. It didn't. The legislature directly made this law because they wanted to target Uber and these gig type of industries to make sure that the workers for these type of companies have certain benefits, and there was a strong push for that. But there was not that much push for agents, and at least from what I know, a lot of agents are more than happy to collect a commission as a side versus a salary, just
Right.
because you have a lot more control over, the commission and what's tax deductible and stuff like that.
Yeah, it sounds like it'll impact a lot of companies more than just the Ubers, because there's like those dog walking apps now,
Mhm.
right? There's so many different apps where you just go do something for somebody and get paid, something, and it's all through a online or web-based platform.
Correct.
So
I
they're
said,
all on the hook now.
this law, again, with any new law that's passed in California, there's always, a couple years where certain cases will work their way up. I won't be surprised Uber, but there's probably other small businesses or other industries that file lawsuits to try to challenge. I know the wine industry, they rely heavily on independent contractors to do their business. Well, can they not do that anymore? A lot of the industries that have lobbyists, they plan to file lawsuits to try to challenge this, or at least carve out exceptions. And we'll get more case law to define each of these tests more as this law ages.
Pharmacy reps, you can add that to the list as well, because they are independent contractors.
Yeah, they're licensed healthcare.
The pharmacy reps.
Oh, they fall under that exception?
Well, it's unclear I don't know.
They're more of like a salesperson.
Yeah,
though.
they're like salespeople.
It says,
Yeah.
let's see what it says,
Are salespeople?
direct salespersons, yes,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so
But,
it is.
Under the unemployment insurance code?
No. So there's an exception to direct salesperson. So direct sales is basically,
described in section
is like pharmaceutical sales reps,
Right.
other direct sales type of companies that is targeting,
It
so.
seems unfair that a salesperson would be carved out as an exception, but you can't, like the
That's-
Uber and Lyft
that's
drivers
what I
and
was
the
gonna
dog
get to.
walkers would not
Yeah.
fall under that exception.
Well, a lot of these companies, they're paid on commission-based, right? So a certain industry that has historically been on a commission-based type of thing is generally, like salespeople, direct sales, you work on commission also. Whether or not Uber drivers work on commission, we
Well,
don't
I
know.
mean, a salesperson is doing all the work, and then that, company or employer who's hiring the salesperson, they just collect a portion of whatever that salesperson makes. But similar to an Uber driver, they're doing the work, they're doing the driving, and the Uber company is just collecting a portion of that, the revenue from that service. So I don't see why there could be, how it's different.
Well,
I
And
think
also-
Uber has a good argument, right, to
And
challenge
that,
this.
based on what you just said too as well, you could count Airbnb, because Airbnb is the same kind of method where,
Yeah.
you're hosting people and Airbnb is collecting a fee, and you're getting whatever it is that you, you,
Like I said,
But I
You're
don't think
abs-
would they be hiring somebody then?
Yeah,
well,
you-
it's the same.
Yeah, you're
concept,
hiring
yeah.
somebody to rent out their
Yeah.
house.
Yeah,
And they
because
you get a portion of
Airbnb
Yeah.
is just like Uber.
Yeah.
You're using different methods.
Yeah,
different,
cause Uber is providing the vehicle and they're
Right.
driving, and then the
Airbnb is
Airbnb person
providing
is
the
just
house.
providing the house.
Yeah.
arguably, like I said, all good arguments, we'll see what the court decides in terms of that, cause I have no idea. All I know is this law was targeting these type of companies.
Mhm.
They wanna make sure California historically has been a very pro-labor type of state, we went through, the agriculture with Cesar Chavez and, agricultural rights and stuff like that. And so, we are a more progressive state, and so I'm not surprised we passed this law to target these type, and this is one of the examples where the law may not be, keeping up with technology, right?
I think
Technology.
they're targeting tech.
Yes.
I think that's what it is, because it's every single tech company that's on the line, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, the dog walking apps, and, those app-based platforms, it's what's being attacked, not the real estate or pharmaceutical reps or the established, kind of sales, methods that's been implemented way in the past.
Yes, absolutely, so, I mean, if you don't like the law, then next, when voting comes, don't vote for.
I didn't even see that, was this even on the ballot?
This was not on a ballot. This was not on the ballot, this was their own with internal, the legislature
Yeah.
in Sacramento.
If it
It's
was
a
on the
House bill,
ballot.
right?
It's a House bill,
Assembly
correct.
bill?
Yeah, the assembly bill, they basically passed this because there was a lot of, and you can hear it on the news, a lot of Uber drivers are not happy, right?
Right.
They're not getting paid, if you actually calculate, they're paid under minimum wage, right? And they're not getting any benefits and stuff like that. So I can see it on the Uber, but I can also see it, these businesses, the tech businesses, they're like, well, why are we staying in California if we have to, with all these stringent labor laws,
Mhm.
right?
So this law is pro-labor, but it would hurt California's revenue
Yeah.
in collecting taxes from companies that operate here,
Potentially,
right?
Yeah, absolutely will. There's no doubt about that. It's gonna limit, how many people could actually drive Uber. Because if they're gonna put that layer of, scrutiny as to who gets to drive an Uber, then, you can as
Yeah.
well just cut off half the population of Uber drivers.
Yeah,
And that's just gonna hurt, and then it could cascade to other things that I mentioned before, like, Airbnb as well.
could be,
Because I feel like that's gonna affect, that platform. It's the same logic if it's a software company, right? And, and Uber is a
Facilitating.
software company, Airbnb is a software company, the dog app is a software company, and all these people are acting in a similar, based on C, I think is what that was, right?
Mhm.
Where they, practice in a similar, I don't
so
remember what
B,
C was,
B.
but, was it B or C?
A, let's go back to the.
I think it was C, where they practice in similar,
Okay, so,
the worker person engaged, yeah.
oh yeah, engage
Yeah.
in independently established, okay, yeah. So
Yeah,
they need to
and then
satisfy, they need to
work.
show the worker has their own, essentially what this means is their worker has their own other business
Yeah.
that they do.
Okay.
So a lot of
They
people
can
are saying,
easily pass that.
yes,
Yeah.
they think you can use it, it's like, you can essentially, yeah, this is very easy to say, I'm hiring someone, well, they have their own business also, like they have other projects that they work for other companies, right? So there's not just working for one person, but again, the test doesn't, it's not based on how many people you work for, right? You can satisfy C and A, most people can satisfy this very easily. It's
Okay.
B that's gonna be very problematic.
Cause it's
Outside of
a,
usual
yeah,
course.
it's an and.
Exactly, and I think you're right, yeah, I'm sorry, B. So, yeah, they're acting outside the scope, they're not doing software engineering for Uber, for Lyft and all these other
Yeah.
guys. They're actually shuttling people around, which is different from what.
Well, that's what Uber is arguing. Uber
Yeah.
is arguing and saying, we're purely a software company.
Right.
We need engineers and software
that's-
developers, but once we design the app,
Yeah,
They're
you
not
know,
doing the driving.
we're not
Yeah.
doing the driving,
Yeah.
you know, they can choose to use the app and drive people around, they choose to do so. The flip side of that as well is Uber is still taking a cut from, they're not selling this app to these people, right? They're taking a cut from the rides that they're performing, so directly, their revenue base is based on the rides that they do. Now, if they had said, well, why don't we just sell these apps to these people and they can use it and we don't take any, it's purely within what they do, I can see that. But as of now, the current business structure doesn't meet.
and maybe they should look into like a kind of, a franchise-like method to like solve that issue, right?
I'm sure
Should
they've
be-
hired
They'll
the
find a
best.
workaround.
They've hired the best attorneys out there
Yeah.
to try to figure out how to get around this or try to invalidate this law, but
It
it's
sounds-
yeah.
They'll probably, continue operations as usual.
What usually will happen is they wanna challenge the law, they will file a case, the judge has the power to stay implementation of this law pending, resolution, and it will go up to the Supreme Court at some point, and we'll see what the California Supreme Court says about this law.
Such a huge,
But
I mean, I think this is gonna hurt a lot of consumers too, right? Cause if these apps are gonna have to contribute to unemployment, do all those things that you have to do
rates
to
go up.
provide for your employees, the rates are gonna go up, they're gonna add more fees and surcharges.
Yeah.
yeah, that you can already tell that Uber's already. I recently used Uber Pool, and it took forever. They had me wait for like 15 minutes before they found a driver. They really.
You think that's a director's
Well,
all of this new law?
Well, no, I'm saying they're trying to save on. They're cutting costs right now, cutting overhead. They're preparing in case they have to restructure their entire business model just to satisfy this. Okay? Because there's no way they have how many drivers? They can't put them all on payroll. They can't all classify them as employees. It's impossible. The amount of paperwork, the amount of logistics that they would need to do, hiring and the HR process. Oh my God, it's a nightmare. Right now, it's so simple to be an Uber driver. Right, you sign up, take it to get it checked out, get your little icon thing, and boom, you can using this. It's very simple. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Hopefully this was informative, at least gives you something to think about and something to watch, because this is something that is starting to happen. In 2 weeks, I will have another lecture. This is on the new landlord-tenant law, the rent control law that will be that has passed. So this is it's also a fairly interesting topic. Encourage you all to attend. Also, same location, just in 2 weeks, Wednesdays,
Okay.
same time. Let your peers know, okay,
Yeah.
that this is an actual interesting lecture. This
I
isn't
think
about
you might wanna
contract
pitch-
law.
You might wanna pitch that rent control to the, students taking, property right now.
Oh, I'll leave it to Junqiao. She
I'm not in property, yeah, I'm taking property already, so.
Yeah, I would like to professional.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. I've been hearing a lot about it.
上课去。